Right, good evening everybody, and welcome to Development Control Committee this evening, Wednesday 25th of October. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements and then we'll get started. Fire evacuation. In the event that we have a fire alarm, there's no drill scheduled. It will be for real. Your fire exit is behind you in the public gallery and behind us in the other end of the chamber. We will gather in the War Memorial Park in the event that we do have a fire evacuation. Hopefully that won't happen. Also, this meeting is webcast, so you will see, if you're watching online, councillors and officers being recorded. So that's for transparency of public decision making. Just a few words on how the committee will work tonight. Development Control Committee is a quasi-judicial committee. On my right in front of me in the chamber are councillors. They will be acting in an apolitical capacity, making decisions based on planning law. These are derived from planning policies in our local plan, or village neighbourhood plans, or the national planning policy framework. They are advised by planning officers to my left, and we've got a lawyer on my right who makes sure everything is kept legal. There'll be opportunities to ask questions of participating members of the public, visiting councillors, people speaking for and against applications, questions to officers from councillors. If we don't have any questions asked, that doesn't necessarily mean there have been no questions asked, because it's the possibility that they may have asked questions in advance of the meeting and got their answers then. Councillors will be approaching this meeting with an open mind, and they'll be gathering information from multiple sources. We've also had a viewing panel last Friday where we went and visited 3 of the sites to get a better picture of the applications and how they stand. So, without further ado, we'll start. And do we have any apologies for absence? Councillor Howard Sorrell? Okay, good. And do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Robertson?
Thank you, Chair. Item 3, I will be standing down from the committee because I have a close personal relationship with the applicants.
Okay, thank you. Councillor?
Thank you, Chair. On item 1, I'm aware that concerns have been expressed on the basis that I called this in and the reasons thereof, and that some people may consider me to be predetermined, although I might have other views. But under the circumstances, I'm happy to leave the committee and watch from afar.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Urgent matters, there are none. Minutes of the meeting held 11th October will be confirmed at the next Development Control meeting on the 8th of November. We normally hold a 4 weekly cycle of Development Control meetings, and the previous one was only 2 weeks ago, which moves us on to applications themselves. And item 1 planning application is for Manor Farm Old Burclere, and could we have the officer introduced, please?
Thank you, Chair. Item 1 seeks planning permission for the erection of a steel portal framed building to be used as a grain dryer and store, together with solar panels, 2 water harvesting tanks, 4 gas tanks, a 25 metre wide area of hard standing, and an entrance road on land at Manor Farm, Burclere. Members are advised that a previous application for a grain dryer and store was refused planning permission in August of last year, which was located some 500 metres from the location of the current proposal. This has been appealed, but a decision by the inspector has yet to be issued. By way of update, there is a further letter of representation that's been received objecting to the proposal. The concerns raised relate to landscape impact, figures stated within the transport assessment and the climate change benefits of the proposal. These matters are all addressed within the main report and don't raise any new considerations. The update paper also includes a summary of the site visit undertaken by the committee last week, and there's also some distances that were requested by members at the site visit as well, and to help illustrate that, a plan has also been included within the visualiser. The agent has also provided some comments on the officer's report and points of clarification. So to summarise, page 27 of the main agenda advises that the proposal includes floodlighting. The agent has clarified that the intention is not that these would be lit all the time, and that it is intended that the scheme would be sensitive to dark skies. In addition, on page 30 of the main agenda, it is stated that the development would result in an increase of 32 vehicular movements along the public right-of-way network. This is incorrect and actually relates to the previous application. So just to clarify, there would not be an increase in vehicular movements along the public right-of-way network under this application. Lastly, the agent has also asked that it be clarified for the committee that the current application is not cited on the site of nature conservation. That was only applicable to the previous application site. The application is before you this evening with a recommendation for refusal, and the application has been called in by Councillor Falconer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have Councillor Carrow from the Parish Council? If you'd like to approach, have we got the seats on the right-hand side there?
Just the back.
The back one?
It's the back, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's it.
That's it. That's great. Thanks very much. Yeah, you press the right-hand button to speak, and when you do, you'll have 4 minutes when you're ready. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair Councillors. Richard Carrow, Parish Council Chair. My thanks to those who visited the site last Friday. This is the second application for a grain dryer in Old Berkeley. The first, for a site on the old railway sidings, was refused, has been appealed and is with pins. During its consideration, we invited the estate to look at alternative sites, which to their credit they did. As to this option, I quote, "The site at Sidmonton Road would be a greenfield site and would have significant impact to the community of Old Berkeley. There would have to be a really extensive tree plantation scheme put in place to obscure views of the proposed development. There would be an increase in tractor movements going past Berkeley Manor and the old station house, and we would need to go onto public highway to access the site." Unsurprisingly, they concluded that it was less favourable. However, they have not conducted any additional site reviews. So imagine our surprise when this application was submitted. As stated, it is on a greenfield site in the AONB, while the sidings is used for agricultural business. The proposed building is significantly larger. The dryer proposed for the sidings would fit inside this one. Others describe it similar to an industrial warehouse. I would say aircraft hangar, but whatever, it is a massive, solitary building, completely incongruous in this setting, and will be visible to all road users and to the many walkers who use the local footpaths, including the Wayfarers Way. We concur with the landscape officer's comment on the LVIA that there is little to be seen of the A34 from Beacon Hill, it mostly being within well-vegetated banks, borne out by the accompanying photographs. Moreover, to reinforce our point, the site is in the direct sight line of the main path descending Beacon Hill. It has the same issues around views, dark skies, etc. as the previous application. That the estate acknowledges its defects should signal caution. We are therefore not surprised by the planning officer's recommendation and support it. I do want to touch briefly on vehicle movements raised by Councillor Faulkner. The vehicle movement figures continue to be contested, but no one disputes that some tractors route via Highclere to Crux Easton. But if approved, some tractors would then have to come the reverse direction, about which there is no clarity at all. And we note there are extensive and well-used tracks on the estate, allowing to and from allowing access to and from Crux Easton. We are familiar with pollution considerations. It was assessed in respect of the A34 for our neighbourhood plan development in Berkeley, which several of you came to see. I would venture concern here would have to be significantly higher than around 1 tractor a day through Highclere, although these journeys must help address the many complaints about speeding through the village.
1 minute.
And we should recall this facility could operate 24/7 using propane gas, creating CO2 emissions. We cannot find any information about how much this would be. More pertinently, we do recognise costs of time and fuel have a bearing on the estate. You know we've suggested it considers other sites that have less impact on the AMB, but still meet its commercial aims. I'd like to thank Lady Carnarvon for her attendance at our January PC, at which this was discussed, but sadly it's not been taken further. In conclusion, this site poses significant harm to the landscape character and visual quality of the area. It is noteworthy that the neighbouring landowner at Sidmonton Court, who one might expect to be understanding, has also written to object. While the PC remains supportive of the estate's ambition, we respectfully invite the DCC, based on the issues with the policies raised in the officer's report, to refuse this application. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and that was pretty much bang on time as well. Okay, councillors, do you have any questions for Councillor Cowan? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Thank you very much for your contribution. And do we have Mr. Lidgley speaking against? Welcome to Development Control. If you see right, yep, there's the right-hand button. And when you're ready, if you press the button, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Chair, councillors, Paul Lidgley. I've lived in Old Berkeley for nearly 35 years and speak for a group of local residents. We concur with the planning officer's recommendation to refuse the application on landscape impact grounds, referencing local plan policies, North Wessex Downs AONB and the NPPF. The application is for a very large industrial style building with floodlighting and gas-fired burners on an undeveloped green field, and will be a gross intrusion into the protected landscape of the AONB in direct sight of local viewpoints on Beacon Hill and Ladle Hill. Relevant policies are EM1. The application does not comply with the requirements to be sympathetic to local character and visual quality, to respect the scenic quality of the landscape, and to integrate with existing settlements and landscape. Contrary to EM10, the proposed building is completely out of scale and character with existing buildings and the landscape setting. A huge, brutal industrial shed really cannot be considered to be good architecture. The proposal doesn't comply with complementary policies B8 and B9 in the Berkeley Parish Neighbourhood Plan. The application fails to take account of key issues identified by the AONB management plan, including damage to dark skies from floodlighting, intrusion on the wider landscape, design and the siting of substantial new farm buildings. If permitted, the proposed development of a large structure akin to an aircraft hangar will drive a coach and horses through all these policy requirements, leading one to ask, what is the point of an AONB? EP4. The applicant says that the existing manor farm buildings are not fit for purpose, but does not then consider rearranging the farmyard with a new grain dryer, but goes for the easy option of a greenfield site. Also, EP4 says that development proposals that result in an increase in HGVs on C-class roads will generally not be permitted. The C57, Sidmonton Road, is designated unsuitable for HGVs, but the application will result in 172 new HGV movements to the site. HGVs on this road will also be dangerous to other road users. The application is before the Committee on Climate Emergency grounds. It's claimed that 374 tractor round trips along the A343 through Highclere to the current drier location at Crux Easton would be removed. We support the Council's strategy to deal with climate issues, but item 2.10 of the Council's own Climate Emergency Action Plan
1 minute remaining.
22-23 report requires current planning applications to meet the existing local plan, and it hasn't yet been updated. So an overriding planning decision cannot be made on climate emergency grounds alone. If tractors on the 343 are being considered, a full climate and energy audit is essential, including tractor movements in both directions, an assessment of gas consumption, the solar panels, and the overall energy profile. The dryers are still gas-fired, but electric dryers would be a contribution to reducing climate impact. The residents request that the planning officer's recommendation to refuse is upheld. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr. Lidgley? I see no hands raised. Thank you very much for your contribution. Apologies for the noise disturbance there. Thank you. And I have down speaking in support Lord Carnarvon, Simon Bird and Tom Brunt. If you'd like to approach the desk on the right. Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, the mic's already on for you. When you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you. I'm Lord Carnarvon, the owner of Porchester Farms. Farming records at Highclere go back at least 500 years. My father and myself have farmed the land in hand since 1952. Our desire has been for balance, to become as productive as possible, whilst ensuring more land is devoted to environmental schemes. Our output in tonnes per hectare of the business has increased, they're achieving higher yields, and we are seeking to improve the old storage facilities currently used at Manor Farm. Like other farmers, we've invested in the latest technologies from GPS guidance and variable application rates of seed. We select varieties for disease resistance to farm more ecologically, adopt direct drilling, and use legumes in the rotation to reduce reliance on artificial nitrogen. We use stubble, turnips, ryegrass, and clovers to feed the sheep flock as part of a more sustainable way of farming for our light chalk soils. The wheat, barley and oats grown here are a vital part of the local food chain, which we all rely for staples we buy, from bread to pastries, breakfast cereals, beer, etc. The farm supports 9 families through full-time employment and a further 2 families at peak times. The horse feed business supports many more, and the racehorse training business around Lambourne, also in our AONB. The business needs to modernise its storage facilities to meet the needs of a modern, larger-scale farming business, which will also dramatically reduce its carbon footprint. Currently, crops harvested at Manor Farm are taken to Crookston to be dry. This is a round trip of 15 miles, with a return journey on a later occasion to collect the crops and bring them back for storage. Approximately 371 tractor and trailer journeys would be saved from fields surrounding the site, currently going to Crookston, which is an hour and 10-minute trip. Removing this traffic from the road would be a benefit to all road users and the residents of Penwood and Highclere. The fuel used in these tractor journeys alone will reduce the farm carbon footprint by 29 tonnes per year, with a further 45 tonnes saved in improving drying productivity and less wear and tear on tractors. The fuel price for red diesel has doubled over the years, and all machines like tractors and combines have increased costs, so minimising wear and tear is vital. Since Brexit, there is much reduced farm support for food production, so we now have to be more productive and save costs to continue to produce the best food for us all, and indeed maintain the beautiful landscape around our area. Why is this site good? It's central to a block of 1,500 arable acres where tractor journeys on the road will be minimised. The site's been an arable field for over 100 years with no significant historic remains. The rear of the site is screened by hedge and hazel bushes. There's a proposed significant planting scheme, which will not only mitigate the effects of this development, but also produce substantial landscape enhancements and will develop 142% biodiversity net gain, far exceeding the LPA required 10%. The site is screened by trees in front and the rear, and the byways in the sunken lane. Electricity capacity is already on site with 3-phase high voltage lines coming from Kingsclere, and a key reason for choosing this field. On landscape merits, Section 6 of the NPPF strongly supports the important role development could have contributing to building a strong competitive economy. Paragraph 84 advises local planning should enable sustainable growth and expansion of all types of business in rural areas, both through the conversion of existing buildings and well-designed new buildings, development and diversification of agriculture and other rural land-based businesses. As far as the long-range views from Beacon Hill are concerned, the proposed grain store would constitute a very small component in a much wider panorama, in which a number of significant non-agricultural developments, such as the A34 Trunk Road and Greenham Business Park, can be seen. Also the case for significant equine-based large buildings at Sidmoutham and Kingsclere, both approved by Basingstoke and Dean. Furthermore, the proposed building has been designed using non-reflective and dark grey-green cladding as per the North Essex Downs A1B advice for chalk woodland colour palettes, so will reduce its visual impact within the landscape. This proposal is to provide an agricultural building and an agricultural landscape directly related to the surrounding arable land use, with key characteristic as part of our AOMB. The proposed development is therefore considered to be compliant with Basingstoke and Dean local policies EM1 and EM10. Can I go on?
Well, you're out of time. If you just
Okay, all right,
sum up.
I'll leave it then. Right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, hands up. Councillor Miller.
Thank you very much. The parish council mentioned that this operation, if this proposal goes ahead, would be 24/7. Could you actually refine that? Is it literally 365 days a year, 24/7?
Now, this is for harvest grain drying. Crooks Easton works most of the year because we're also processing oats. This is solely for harvest, so we're talking about, depending on the weather, into mid-July to the beginning of mid-September, and that's it. Obviously, trucks will come to remove dry grain from store in a much more spread out period for all the way through the autumn into January and February. But that happens already. That's already coming to Manor Farm like that. The nighttime lights will be required during the harvest period because of the weather. We often have to cut grain and dry it at night.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Been given a figure of some 370 tractor movements a year. Can you break that down a little bit more for us? Presumably they're all in the harvest time rather than, that 370.
It's very heavily, and there could be, on our bigger fields over there are times when there are 3 tractor and trailers supporting the modern combine. So if it's going on from when it's dry enough to do it from 10 o'clock in the morning to night, they may be well moving. Each one of them is doing 6 return journeys, so there's 20 in one day. But it's concentrated mostly in the heavy use of the harvest period.
Councillor Rattigan.
You've mentioned planting. Obviously, you need to be quite substantive to make sure that the visual impact is reduced. Will you be using native plants?
Yes. I think, Tom, you know more about than me, but yes, it's the intention generally of the estate, where possible, to use native plants, with one proviso. Some of them suffer more from diseases nowadays than they used to, and we sometimes have to make some changes.
Substantial.
I'm sorry, we can't have contributions to the audience. You're not on mics. You won't be recorded.
Chair, so I was trying to say on top of
No, sorry. If you're not down to speak, you can't.
well, I can't speak.
No, but if
I should be done there, okay.
no, if you've had. There's been 4 minutes for objectors to speak. We can't have any more speakers. However, we can have more councillor questions if any councillors got any more questions. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for your contribution. Can you switch the mic off on
do that.
the right-hand button?
Press the button.
The right-hand one. Hopefully that one. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have any questions for officers? I don't see any hand. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. As most people might know, I've been involved in the AONB and working on the council's behalf. I was their representative on the AONB council partners and on the management working group. And I had quite a hand in producing that management plan at the time. And one of the things we were endeavouring to do was encourage the improvement in farming in protected landscapes. And in fact, one of our new officers here was working with me at the time. And I hope that was included within the management plan and that was taken into account when the officers looked at this application. Could I confirm that they actually referred to the management plan and picked those points up?
Okay, that's the question, right? Okay.
Thank you. The officer who dealt with the application is obviously not here. I'm just presenting this application before you tonight. But the management plan is referred to throughout the report. It is listed as a material document on page 17 of the agenda. So on that basis, I would say that it's been given due consideration in the consideration and the recommendation that's put for you tonight. The AONB were consulted on the application, but they did not provide any comments on the application.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. We've got this application before us, and I believe there's a previous one that is currently at appeal. Am I right in thinking that if we were to approve this tonight, and then the inspector approved the other one, there would be absolutely nothing to stop the applicant building both grain stores?
That is correct.
Thank you.
And Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I was one of the questions for officers. What weight can we put towards the emerging local plan? I've had a chance to view some of the policies that are coming through that, and the support of rural economy is quite prevalent in those policies. Can I just get an idea of weight?
Yeah, the emerging local plan is not advanced enough yet to hold any weight in decision making.
Thank you. Any more questions for officers? Okay, so we'll move on to debate. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to carry on from where I left off. I just heard the officer mention that the AONB management plan is a material document in this consideration. The government, and I will go back to what the government calls FIPL, farming in protected landscapes, and millions has been going into the programme to support the rural economy. Because of what has been mentioned in this chamber this evening about food supplies and everything else, and to make it as efficient as possible. This country has to become more and more self-dependent on food source, and to my mind, it's very encouraging that this application before us tonight is moving in that direction. We've got to economise, we've got to look at modern technologies, we've got to be conscious of the climate change that's going on, and any effort to actually improve that situation, I think we ought to applaud. Now, yes, it was a greenfield site. We went to see it on Friday. However, it's a balance, isn't it, about what we put in our protected landscapes against the gain. It's a checks and balances kind of a discussion here. And to my mind, the way I see it is that there is a benefit here for a more efficient production, as what Carnarvon just mentioned, to be more productive and to produce the kind of grain products that help other economies. It's a chain reaction. And quite honestly, I personally would look towards overturning this refusal recommendation by the officers, but I'm quite prepared to listen to other members and see what they say.
Okay, so you're not moving, but you're contributing. Okay,
Yes,
Councillor
thank
Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm thoroughly convinced by the arguments of Lord Carnarvon in terms of the need for the building to help the efficiency of the enterprise. So from that point of view, I'm fully in favour of it. I mean, Councillor Miller has already mentioned food security. That is another plus, I think, for it as well. I don't believe that the views from Ladle Hill, Beacon Hill, the public right-of-way or the Dew Pond are of particular concern as far as I'm concerned. They've all been brought up as reasons, perhaps, which should be thought about in terms of refusal. But for me, just the size of the building in that immediate landscape is just too much. It towers above the local trees, like the local tree line, from what we would see, from what we saw on our site visit on Friday. There's no hiding it, you couldn't get away from it. So in spite of the fact that I think there is a need for it, I don't think there is a need for it in this particular location. So I tend to go along with the officer view on this, and I will be edging in terms of the recommendation and refusal, but I'm not putting forward for refusal.
You're not moving the recommendation?
Not yet.
Okay, right, so we don't have a mover for anything yet. Okay, Councillor Rattigan?
Thank you, Chair. Having driven down the A34 this morning, I have to say that that is a blight on the landscape. And if you view the A34 from Beacon Hill, you're not that impressed with the number of vehicles going up and down from Southampton. To be honest, it is, how could anything that's farm related be sympathetic in an outstanding landscape? We accept that. But I do think there is value in having listened to the applicant to say, he's made the point, we do need to support rural economies, and he's related to the fact that Kingsclere has had big buildings in it itself, and obviously I am the councillor for Kingsclere, so I'm well aware that we have had equine, large stabling at Park House, and a number of large developments within the AONB and unbounding the AONB. So although, yes, I understand the reasons for refusal here, I at the moment, until the debate is finished, I won't tell you where I'm headed in terms of my vote, but these are things that I've been looking at and thinking of.
Okay, so we still haven't got a mover or second. Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Bound. We do need to allow farms to modernise, because if farms don't modernise, they become unprofitable. If they become unprofitable, there is quite understandably a massive temptation for them to sell land for housing, which is considerably less popular than putting an agricultural building in. But I've read all the reports on this application. I've also read the reports on the application that's at appeal. And it seems that we've not just gone from the frying pan to the fire, we've gone from an application that was refused to one that is even worse. We've gone from a brownfield site to a greenfield site. So I do agree with the officer recommendation to refuse it. If not refuse it, certainly to delay it until after we see the result of the appeal. It's very difficult to make a decision on this when the appeal decision isn't that far away, because I think the appeal site of the two, I think the appeal site is the more acceptable. So for that reason, I will actually move the officer recommendation to refuse. Thank you.
Okay, we've had the mover. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hussey? Councillor Durrant, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Much of what I was going to say has been said already. My thinking is this is an agricultural site. It's an agricultural business, and it needs to have efficiencies, and it needs to do its job. And therefore, I am in favour of the proposal to approve it rather than refuse it. if you wish me.
Councillor Hussey.
I've had many reasons justifying the need for this facility. I haven't heard one reason given yet which goes against the reasons for refusal as outlined by the officers. We're not talking about justification for the need, we're talking about it in this location of this size. So I stick with the officers' recommendation. I've not heard any arguments to undermine their decision, their reasoning.
Okay, we have a recommendation on the table. I will crave your indulgence, Councillor Court. Have you got anything to say that's germane before we move to vote?
Nothing further, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, right, we'll move to vote then. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Those against? Okay, that's refused. Can we have the decision, please?
Thank you. The application is refused for the reasons are set out on page 15 of the main agenda. Thank you.
Okay, next item up, item 2, West End House. If we could have the officer introduction, please.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 2, which can be found on page 41 of tonight's agenda, is a full application for the erection of a one detached 5-bed dwelling house, a detached double garage, access and landscape at West End House, Mortimer Lane, Stratfield, Say. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined in the officer's report in the agenda pack. Thank you.
And welcome back, Councillor Faulkner. Okay, have we got Councillor Toms from Parish Council? If you'd like to approach. Welcome to Development Control. If you take a seat on the right and press the button right when you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes.
Good evening, Chair, Councillors. I'm speaking on behalf of the Parish Council, as the Chair, Vice Chair and Clerk all had prior commitments. It is the view of the Stratfield Say Parish Council that this amended application for planning permission should be rejected for the following reasons. The application does not fulfil any local housing need, and this is confirmed by the planning officer. The applicants state that the proposal complies with SS 6E, but a prerequisite of that policy is demonstrating a locally agreed need. The applicants cannot argue the borough-wide housing shortfall represents a local need for a large single dwelling in West End Green. The second reason is the reason given by the planning officer for her recommended approval is simply that there is no local plan in place. It does not seem fair that strong, legitimate objections from local residents are ignored and dismissed just because there is no local plan in place. 3, the issues surrounding the landscape and the removal of trees as identified by the Natural Environment team remain. Lines of sight for the property mean that both mature hedgerow and trees must be removed, as identified by HCC highways. The improved sight lines will require further removal of any remaining hedge plants from the site. Google Street View shows a dense mature hedge on the southern boundary where the new access is to be formed. This has been removed, leaving the site now open to view. This has resulted in biodiversity net loss that is not accounted for in the BNG metric, contrary to EM4 of local plan. The proposal will have a significant negative impact on both landscape character and visual amenity. It is the Parish Council's view that the environmental harms identified by the Natural Environment team outweigh the benefit of a large single dwelling. 4, the proposal is very unpopular with local residents as the design of the house is inappropriate in both scale and design. We would expect any dwelling to provide a softer edge where the settlement reached the countryside, and we will believe it will have a detrimental impact on the character of the village. The design of the house and garage does not fit in with the local area. The house is incongruous, it is white in colour, and the garage is positioned at the front of the house. In accordance with policy EM1 of the adopted local plan, there would be harmful visual impacts by the creation of open views of a new house in this location. The new dwelling would disrupt views of what is currently open countryside, especially from the direction of Green Lane. 5, the applicants have been less than open with the community. Having lived in their property for 37 years, they applied in 2019 to incorporate this previously agricultural land into their garden.
1 minute left.
Just 4 years later, they are now applying for permission to build on this former agricultural land. Many residents feel this was a calculated manipulation of the planning regulations simply for financial gain, and that approval of this application would set a regrettable precedent. The application does not deal with the non-compliance with BDBC policy regarding a new house on agricultural land, and indeed NPPF discourages what it terms inappropriate development of gardens. So, in summary, the overwhelming local feeling that this is the wrong development in the wrong location for the wrong reasons, and it would be quite unjust to override the views of the local community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Councillor Toms on the committee? I don't see any hands raised. Thank you very much, Councillor Toms, for your contribution. And we have down speaking in objection to this application, Mrs. Toosey, if you'd like to approach. Welcome to Development Control. Right hand button there. When you're ready, you've got 4 minutes. Thank you.
I'm reading this statement at the request of Richard Hand. It's actually his statement of Moorlands, a neighbouring property, as he's unable to attend in person tonight. Unfortunately, I'm unable to attend the committee in person due to a long-standing prior commitment. However, I would be grateful if the further comments made below could be taken into account. Our original letter of objection remains entirely valid, as the applicant's revisions to the proposed design do not address any of the points of concern made therein. I am a fellow of the RICS and a fellow of the Institute of Housing, so fully understand what a good and appropriate development looks like. This proposal represents none of these. We believe that the office's recommendation conclusion is illogical, as the application fails the tests of NPPF and the Council's own policies in several respects. The Landscape Officer's negative conclusion has been overlooked, and the highways requirement for its entrance splay sightlines relies upon visibility through our land, which is already planted with a mature hedge, and thus the application's design is flawed, with the highways requirements being unable to be fulfilled. We strongly oppose the proposed application, which fails to comply with NPPF in several respects, in particular section 13 as well as paragraph 80. The absence of a detailed 5-year land supply within the borough is insufficient reason to allow for inappropriate and poor design quality development such as this, and it is thus unfair to penalise the local community by approving this application. All of the neighbours that we have spoken with object to the proposals, yet have collectively recently supported several other applications within the village which were appropriate. We urge the committee to respect the overriding views of the local community, which will not benefit at all from this proposal. The proposed site represents agricultural land in a greenbelt area outside of the council's development boundary that has been absorbed into the garden area by stealth, and this appalling method of transfer of use should not be rewarded with development consent for personal gain. We note that this application includes an unusual and poorly detailed biodiversity area outside of the development site curtilage. Unfortunately, the applicants are not considerate neighbours and have a history of antisocial behaviour towards their neighbours, including allowing their hedges to grow to a considerable height, over 20 foot, and the planting of trees on the boundary line, thus blocking light from our property. And we're very concerned that this application will engender further opportunities to fail to maintain the property in a neighbourly fashion. We also note the purposeful setting back of the proposed house to block our views across the fields beyond and position windows that intrude into our master bedroom. This is contrary to the Council's overlooking and sightline policy. On the basis of overwhelming local opposition to this inappropriate development that does not comply with both local and national policy, we trust that the committee members will reject the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Do we have any questions for Mrs. Toosey from the committee? Councillor Bound.
Thank you. Could you tell me where Mr. Hand lives in relation to the map?
Yes.
My map, I can't see
So
what the names of the houses are.
Shall I speak? Sorry. So Mr. Hand lives, as you're looking at the proposed site, to the left of it in a house called Moorlands, which is a white house and was a pub.
Is that immediately to the left?
Yes,
Got
that
it.
one.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bound, can you switch your mic off if you finish? Thanks. Any more questions? Mrs. Toosey, thank you very much for your contribution. And speaking in support, I have Mrs. Mayo down. Mrs. Mayo, if you'd like to approach. Welcome to Development Control. When you're seated and ready, there's a button on the right. You'll have 4 minutes. Thank you very much. If you press the right-hand button on the console.
We bought our house and garden in West End Green, Stratfield Say, over 40 years ago, not 37, and initially kept 2 ponies in part of the 3-acre garden. Then the whole area was opened up and we planted hedges and trees, around 40, to create a garden for our children to grow vegetables. However, we are now 75 and 80 years old, have had many serious illnesses and can no longer maintain the large garden. We wish to remain in West End Green as it's only about a mile from both Bramley and Mortimer, where there are trains and bus services to Reading and Basingstoke, and importantly is on main drainage, but there are no suitable homes available. The small side area of our garden with its existing access onto Green Lane in the 30-mile-an-hour area is ideal to build a new house with a small, manageable garden easily fenced off from the main garden for us to relocate to leaving existing garden unaffected. West End Green has a very diverse housing stock. Many houses are brick built and a large number are rented, including the 5, 4 and 2-bedroom houses which replace the demolished shop. Many owner-occupied houses have been extensively enlarged to 5 and 6-bedroom homes, and the Moorlands next door has just built a large 5-car garage and workshop which is built within 1 metre of our boundary, removing the hedges and erecting a 6-foot boarded fence adjacent to our planned site. 2 detached brick houses were built recently on Mortimer Lane. A farmer has just demolished a pair of semi-detached houses to replace with a further 3 detached properties and gained permission to demolish Parsons Barn, Green Lane, which is in view across the fields behind our garden, to be replaced by an extremely large 2-storey house with 5 to 6 bedrooms. We wish to refute some inaccuracies in documents submitted. Both the landscape officer and Stratfield Say Parish Council continue to state the plot is agricultural land, which is untrue. Basingstoke and Dean confirmed its status as garden many years ago. The officer's report also acknowledges that the development would not result in any adverse harm on the landscape or character of the area to warrant refusal of the development. The Parish Council stated is incongruous, rendered white, but there are other rendered white properties within West End Green. Councillor Toms lives in one, and the one next door, Moorlands, is also white, one of which is actually adjacent to our site, with a plethora of other finishes around the place, brick, wood cladding, etc. The Parish Council state there's no local need for a house of this side and the garage is in front of the house and is detrimental to the local environment. But they have made no objections to the parson's barn replacement, construction which also has a garage at the front of the property and which will need septic tank waste facilities, and was submitted on the same date as ours in February and approved 2 months later. The landscape officer is incorrect re-mention of visual aspects
1
and
minute
public
remaining.
rights of way being affected. The only footpath near has no view of the site. It is behind many houses and mature trees. West End Green is protected by large mature wooded areas, so there are no sight lines, nor is the site near any conservation or heritage areas. Landscape officer is incorrect to say there is a mixed hedgerow along the front. There is not a mixed hedgerow along the front. There is no covenant in place on our garden, as stated by one objector. We would also note that the two neighbouring properties have reiterated their objections. Both properties have bought small areas from our garden to supplement theirs in the past and have indicated recently they want to purchase more ground from us, which would be extremely detrimental to the large garden which would be sold with the existing house. The planning officer states at the beginning of a report that the proposal would integrate successfully with and would not detract from the overall quality of the area and was therefore acceptable. I wish to raise the concerns that Councillor Tutsi, who spoke just now, who built a very large house in a very small plot in the garden of her bungalow in Green Lane, and Councillor Toms, who lives in an extended white rendered house, made no objections to the plan for Parsons Barn.
Can you sum up and then, yeah.
All the three detached properties, all to be built in West End Green on the large 5-car garage and workshop, which was built immediately on our boundary by Mr. Hand, who asked Councillor Tutsi to come here to make his objections, which I find extremely unpleasant when he then says we are an antisocial
I'm going to have
neighbours.
to, we're out of time here.
Fine,
sorry.
but I don't feel that he should have been allowed to make comment on my personality.
Okay. Councillors, do you have any questions for Mrs Mayo? Okay, right. Thank you, Mrs Mayo. Yeah, if you'd like to switch the mic off on your right, that would be great. Questions for officers? Councillor Miller, Councillor Rangan.
Thank you. I'd just like to explain something. I'm slightly confused on some of the wording in the actual report. I understand there's the argument about the lack of a 5-year land supply and referencing to para 11 of the MPPF. However, on page 48 or 49, the report goes into a lot of detail about SS6E when it says that the applicant has failed to adequately prove that there is a local need. If the statement at the start of this report says the policies about housing supply are null and void, why do we go through all these paragraphs quoting SS6E and stating the applicant has failed to demonstrate local need? It's a very confusing way of presenting this to committee members, because which way do we go on this? Okay. Because I look at this, there is no need, and this...
Okay, I think we've captured the question. Thanks.
Right.
Thank you, Councillor. So the policies themselves are still for consideration. They are at a reduced weight due to the housing land supply position, so we still have to go through the process of considering them. So just because you don't have a 5-year housing land supply doesn't mean that you can't be compliant with other policies in the plan. So if there was demonstrated there was a local need, then we'd go through SS6E and meet those tests. But just because we have a shortfall, we still need to assess them. So unfortunately, that's the process we have to go through for this type of application. So yes, I appreciate it can be confusing. There's a lot to it, but we still have to consider those local plan policies.
Councillor Miller, you've got a second question?
I have. On that basis, what weight do we apply to it? You say reduced weight. There is still weight applicable here on SS6E. Can we apply weight to that as a committee or in our judgment?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, as decision makers, you can put weight to that. I think the weight would be limited to that policy. But yes, as a decision maker, you can weigh up the proposal in accordance with the local plan policies. But given the land supply position and the out-of-date policies, I would sort of suggest that it's limited weight.
Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. If I can direct committee to page 56, it was alluded to that the biodiversity net gain was 0 by the parish council. Can you just confirm that that 25% gain is the correct number?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, as you sort of mentioned, the report does state a 25% gain. Again, it's not my application, but yes, that is my understanding that it would provide that gain on the site as reported.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. Bottom of page 51 is an appraisal of the landscape report. Would it be possible for somebody to read out the landscape comments in full?
I can certainly
help, so I'm quite happy to do it myself.
Yeah, we can cover that in debate, I think. Any further questions? Don't see any hands up. Right, we'll move on to debate then. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. When I started looking at this, I couldn't locate it in my mind from the map that we've got. So I went on the portal and looked at the application in full. And the first report I came across was the landscape report. And it says there would be a harmful impact in the form of a significantly large detached two-storey dwelling. A large section of existing native mixed hedgerow will be lost to the new access on the highway on the southern boundary. The development will be contrary to the key characteristics of the Loddon and Lyde Valley LCA. There will be harmful visual impacts by the creation of open views of a significantly large detached two-storey dwelling combined with a large area of hard standing, detached double garage and associated domestic paraphernalia, particularly through a new access to the highway on the southern boundary. Long-ranged views of the property would also be created from the public rights-of-way just off Mortimer Lane to the north-east. The new dwelling would interrupt the views of what is currently open countryside, given the prominent eastern elevation to Green Lane. In landscape terms, the amendments do not address the comments made previously. And as described above, the proposals would have a negative impact on both landscape character and visual amenity. And their final comment is objection. I really find it difficult to take such a strong objection and then in the committee report that you've got on page 51 say that is insufficient reason to refuse this. So for that reason, for the landscape comments, I move for refusal. Thank you.
Okay, we have a mover for refusal. Anyone else want to speak? Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I've looked at it and the impact of another dwelling on that, when you see the quantum of development on the block plan there, I think is fairly minimal. And I get it that any development will block out views and change somewhat the character of an area, but I don't feel the level of this is so impactful that it does character harm to the area. And as it stands, I'm in favour. And as to someone's point about it's not needed, you put a house on the market, if it doesn't sell, it's not needed. If it sells, it's needed. So the reality is, I'm actually supportive of the officer's report on this.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I made my point and got an answer on the local need. It's not a need of somebody who wants to build a house and sell it. It's a local need which is demonstrated by the community. And in the policies off the top of my head, it's generally, if there is one, a parish council determines that local need. As far as the landscape that Councillor Robinson just read out, none of that I have seen, maybe I've missed it as I've gone through the report, is evidence in the report. That disturbs me, because landscape is something we hold dear to everybody. Now, that's a very thorough description of what the landscape, presumably written by the landscape officer, is contributing to this report. And we hear it through the planning portal, but not in the papers that we see before us. I tend to support the recommendation to refuse this application.
Are you seconding?
I'll second it.
Excellent. Right, we now have a motion which has been moved and seconded. Does anybody else have a contribution before we move to vote? Okay, can we get the reasons for refusal, please? Yeah.
As per the landscape report.
Chair, if I can assist with that, as I understand it, it was in relation to the size and scale of the property and the impact on the landscape, including the removal of the hedge for the access that were pertinent points that were picked up. So that'd be contrary to policy EM1 of the local plan.
There will be harmful impact from the form of a significantly large detached two-storey dwelling. The hedge, which we've already mentioned, impact on views, long range and short range. The view dwelling would interrupt view is what is currently open countryside. I'm sure you can pick it all up from the report. Thank you.
Right, so we have a motion on the table, moving refusal, duly seconded with reasons for refusal. I shall now move to vote. Those in favour of refusal, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's carried. Okay, those against? Okay, and abstentions? Just me, okay. Right, that's refused. Can we have the decision, please?
Thank you, Chair. So that application has been refused due to the landscape harms and impacts of the proposal due to its scale and sitting within the open countryside. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Item number 4, Hartley House, Hartley Westwell. Oh, item 3, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Item 3, and Councillor Robinson, I believe you wish to leave. Okay, if we could have the officer introduction, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 3 seeks permission in principle for the demolition of the existing equestrian buildings on site and the erection of a minimum of 3 and maximum of 5 dwellings, along with the erection of a new equestrian barn of up to 150 square metres. As illustrated within the submitted location plan, the application site comprises of 2 separate parcels of land. For the purposes of the report, Site A is the location of the proposed housing, which comprises of the existing equestrian buildings and paddock, and Site B forms part of a larger area of paddock located some 70 metres west of Site A, and just to clarify, Site B is currently undeveloped. The application site is located within the countryside and adjacent to the Sherfield-on-Loddon Conservation Area. The update paper includes a summary of the site viewing panel's visit last week. Following from this site visit, members are advised that a photo of Carpenter's farmhouse as viewed from the highway has been included within the visualiser for you to view. The application has been brought to the Development Control Committee at the request of Councillor Tomlin, and the application is recommended for refusal for the reasons on page 71 and 72 of the main agenda. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Do we have Councillor Darker to speak in favour of the parish? Yeah, if you'd like to come forward, seat to your right. Welcome to Development Control. And when you're ready, if you push the button to the right, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The Parish Council has already stated its wish to refuse this application, and I have 4 points. The first one is that this development would destroy the integrity of the strategic gap, which is a key policy of the local and the neighbourhood plans. It's also a Trojan horse, as the sponsors have also applied to build 80 homes in the new local plan. They have also equivocated over the number of houses, talking about 3 or 5. The second point is that these houses of 3 to 4 bedrooms, or 5 bedrooms, if they apply to use the roof space, as did the neighbouring recent development, are not what's required in our rural community. We need 2 to 3 bedroom units for young families or downsizers. Point 3 is the houses would access onto a narrow and dangerous single track lane, which is banked on both sides. So in the event of a large vehicle using that track, pedestrians, if they meet it, are at great risk. The track is also used by commercial traffic going to the light industry units on the Goddard's farm at the top of the lane. And the last point is that this proposal will be detrimental to the heritage assets of Carpenton's Farm and Ballsdown Camp, which they would overlook. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillors, do you have any questions?
Sorry, yes.
I think you got away with it. Thank you very much for your contribution. Oh, can you switch the mic off? Oh, someone will. No, it's all right. Leave it on. Leave it on. We'll have the next speaker.
Yeah. That's it?
Mr. Isles speaking in. We've got no objectors down. Mr. Isles speaking in support. Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is James Isles from Pro Vision Planning. We are grateful that the application is being given full consideration this evening and the members were able to visit the site on Friday. In many respects, your offices have no objection to the proposal. It is, after all, in accordance with policy SS6, which controls development in the countryside. The proposed residential land use is clearly appropriate on the edge of the village and complements the neighbouring small development of new houses known as Little Paddock. It is not an isolated development as defined by your local plan, and your officer reports that it is well related to the settlement. The amount of development is agreed to be acceptable with a low density, even if all 5 of the homes were built, which complements the rural setting. The small barn with its existing field access is also agreed to be acceptable in principle. It would be a very modest barn for storage of tractors, etc., to support the continued use of the paddocks. Careful positioning and design would follow in due course. Very significantly, this is previously developed land with an established access. Currently, there is a small cluster of rather ordinary and utilitarian barns set back from the lane supporting the equestrian paddocks. The strategic gap won't be compromised, as your officers have acknowledged. Significantly, there is no concern in terms of highways. It is also agreed that the proposal would make a positive contribution to the housing land supply, which remains below the requisite 5 years. However, we would suggest that the contribution is more positive than the limited benefit reported, especially when noting comments by planning inspectors on similar proposals elsewhere in the district, such as at Walton Hill, where the inspector afforded just 3 homes significant positive weight. The areas of objection are on the impact on the character of the local area. Notwithstanding that the details of the proposal include the layout and architectural design will follow, we do consider that your officers have overestimated the degree of harm. In respect of the setting of Carpenter's Farm, as I suspect you saw on your visit on Friday, the proposed development is well away from the listed building with no clear line of sight between the two. The listed farmhouse is on the opposite side of Goddard's Lane, which is significantly screened by mature trees, and there is already an existing dwelling, and of course the paddocks, between our site and the listed building. Then there is the setting of the conservation area. By noting the appropriate land use and the appropriate scale of development and the replacement of utilitarian barns, we are confident that the impacts can be managed through detailed design stage when the layout and appearance will be considered. Likewise, in respect of the wider landscape, while the existing barns would be replaced by dwellings and their associated gardens and parking, etc., we considered the perceived harm is exaggerated in this instance. As you will have seen, the existing buildings are not visually attractive. In fact, they arguably detract from the local character. The farm they were associated with originally has long gone. Therefore, they offer little agricultural character.
1 minute.
At detailed design stage, remembering this is a permission in principle application, your officers would be closely involved in designing a scheme that respects the rural setting, including, for example, careful choice of materials. Buildings could be set back from Goddard's Lane, preserving the existing boundary trees and providing a discrete street frontage. And in respect of the new barn, again, this will be modest in proportion, single story, and is contained from longer distant views, largely by the mature hedges and trees on the field boundaries. It would read as part of the village setting and would be an obvious feature to be found in a paddock field setting. A high quality scheme here, taking advantage of the previously developed land and including the biodiversity net gain we're proposing, can make a positive contribution to the locality and a modest but important boost to housing supply. Therefore, we seek your support this evening to allow us to move on to the detailed design stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you. I was wondering what consideration you'd given to giving us a detailed planning permission, because quite honestly, I think I speak for a number of us that hate PIPs because you don't know what you're going to get. And although you rightly point out that our officers will be involved in a detailed planning permission, I just wondered what consideration you'd given to that.
Thank you, Councillor. Permission in principle application is about location, amount and scale. You do not require consideration of appearance. So for I believe what I wanted to educate, the government's intention is to support smaller landowners to bring forward sites without having to go through the necessary expense of full architectural design before even the principle is agreed.
Yep.
We've just had a planning appeal in Ashford Hill. Can you just tell me where the settlement boundary is in relation to this application site?
Thank you, Councillor. Is that one for me or for the officer? It is outside of the settlement boundary. Policy SS6 allows for exceptions to that, and this is in accordance with policy SS6 by virtue of being on previously developed land.
Councillor Durrant.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if you can clarify for us. At the viewing panel, the owner said to us that the new building would not be an equestrian barn. It would be basically a 3-bay store for tractor and other agricultural bits and pieces. Is that true?
Well, thank you, Councillor. Again, the proposed barn is to have the kit, the tractors and the equipment that would look after the paddock area. So not for horses, as I understand it. But again, as a permission in principle, the detail of the design is to follow.
Okay, Mr. Earls, could you switch your mic off? Councillor Miller, yes, you can.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned something about the current buildings on that site. Could you repeat what you said? Is to do not in agricultural use or something like that? I couldn't remember your exact words. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Very happy to explain. These are equestrian buildings In the past, they would have originated as agricultural buildings. They've been used in equestrian use for a number of years now, and there is a certificate of lawfulness to establish that they are equestrian use. And I believe your office has covered that very well in the report.
Yeah, I was just curious about your remark, that you said they were out of use now? Redundant, maybe?
Sorry, my comment, I believe, Councillor, was that the farm that they were originally associated with is no longer in operation there, so they are no longer part of an operational farm holding.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get straight, because they are not in use by a farm at all. It's just a piece of land with some buildings on it.
That's partially correct, sir, but they have been in use in equestrian use in support of the paddocks. But the key point is they're not part of a farm holding.
No further questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Isles.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Could the officers just run past me yet again about a PIP, please? Because the reasons for refusal said the proposal would result in adverse landscape, visual impacts in the rural edge of the village context, which would not be sympathetic to and would fail to respect. Does that apply to a PIP, or is it applying to the indicative layout that they've presented?
Thank you. The considerations for a PIP are limited to location, land use and amount of development. In respect of landscape, there are several layers really to that as a consideration. You can have concerns about something in landscape impacts due to a principle of development in that location, which is what this application, reason for refusal relates to. It's the provision of housing in this location that is considered to have an adverse landscape impact. Within the report and within the landscape officer's comments, the landscape officer did have concerns separately with the indicative layout, but that itself doesn't form part of the reason for refusal because that is not for consideration.
Councillor Durant, do you have a question?
Just a quick question, just clarification for me, really. I think it was either in the last meeting or the meeting before that we actually used the 5-year land supply situation to justify approving a PIP, whereas in this one we don't really talk about it at all. It just seems a bit inconsistent to me. So if you could help me understand.
So as with all applications, there is a planning balance to be had. At the crux of it, the local plan policies are currently out of date and therefore have reduced weight. In accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework, we therefore have to consider the benefits of the proposal and the associated harms of the proposal and form a balance. In instances where there are protected landscapes, for example, or heritage impacts, that tilted balance doesn't come into play. So there are instances such as this where the lack of 5-year housing land supply is given reduced weight because the test that's required to undertake that assessment isn't engaged by this application because the officers have indicated that there is heritage harm, and that is one of the instances where that then balance isn't required. If that makes sense.
Councillor Miller, although you asked more than one question of the previous speaker, I'll allow you the question this time.
I didn't realise you rationed people asking questions of different speakers, Chairman, having sat in that chair for 6 years. Anyway, my question is, it was stated by the applicant, the agent, that SS6E was satisfied, again, I come back to my point. How much weight are we putting on this? It's being quoted by applicants towards applications, in support of applications, but how much notice do we have to take of that?
Thank you. So in this instance, the site A is previously developed land. So it is, as a matter of principle, falls within policy SS6A. There is no evidence has been submitted for the application in relation to the local need for SS6E. So I think you're referring to SS6A. So as a matter of principle, it falls within that exception, but then there are several criteria within that policy that it has to meet. One of those being that the development has to be appropriate to the site's context, and given the reasons for refusal, officers argue that it wouldn't be appropriate in this location for the reasons outlined. So the development as a whole wouldn't comply with all of the detailed criteria of policy SS6A.
Councillor Rattigan?
Yes, can I ask officers, can you confirm when the neighbourhood plan was made and does it have the protections within it?
We're just clarifying that for you. It was made in March 2018, and so it doesn't have the added protection because it's more than 2 years old.
Okay, any more questions for officers? Okay, we'll move on to debate. Do I have anyone wishing to speak? Councillor Rattigan.
Thank you, I'll just get it started. I don't like the fact it's outside the settlement boundary, but the neighbourhood plan needs to be updated and has not been done so in spite of our lack of a 5-year housing land supply. It obviously meets some of the criteria for SS6 and in all honesty, I didn't think any additional building within this site would have a harmful effect on Carpenter's Farm as we walk down. Somebody alluded to the fact that 80 homes have already been applied for. I don't actually think that is strictly true on the Goddard's farm site. So in reality, it is a horrible site. It's a mess. And on the basis that we have just seen a new development to the east of it with those number of houses, I think this is acceptable in my view, as it does not have an adverse effect on the visual amenity, and the village context is still met as that road winds down to, you know, who wouldn't know it was in the village is my view, and it actually sits quite well within the in the village. And until they can sort out a settlement boundary, I think this is acceptable to me as an individual. So I move approval.
Okay, do we have anyone else wishing to speak? Councillor Hussey, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 95, the location plan, and I'm looking at this sort of block diagram, and the plots, relatively speaking, are quite a decent size, and with the houses that on that plan, they look quite spacious. The highest density of housing is to the southeast of the application site at the cul-de-sac end of Little Paddock, and that plot is 25% approximately wider and about 20% longer, and it's got 4 properties in, and that is much more dense than the surrounding areas. Now, coming to this application, it says a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5, and that would be a much higher density than we're looking at on that block diagram. I couldn't agree to this because I can't accept a maximum of 5. If they'd have stuck with 3, then perhaps, but this is approved between 3 to 5. And I just cannot accept that level of density It would be out of keeping with the rest of the area on that alone. So I would support the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Okay, we have a mover in favour of approval, Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to, I've still got to make my mind up, but I think in terms of reason for refusal, number 2, I totally agree with Councillor Rattigan. I can't see the problem. We walked up the lane. The carpenter's farmhouse was well screened and was set down. I can't see that it had very much, the new proposal would have very much effect on this particular proposal that we've got in front of us. I think that will be difficult to sustain if it came to an appeal.
Okay, we have approval moved. Do I have a seconder for approval of this application? No seconder, then the proposal falls. Do we have another proposal?
Chair, I believe Councillor Hussey proposed the officer's recommendation.
But okay, so you're moving refusal.
And I'll second that, Chair.
Okay, so we now have a live proposal moved and seconded. All those in favour of refusal, please show. Okay, those against? Yep. So can we have the decision, please?
Thank you. The application is refused for the reasons set out on page 71 and 72 of the main agenda. Thank you.
Okay, item 4, Hartley House, Hartley Westbourne. Can we have the officer introduced, please?
Thank you, Chair. So item number 4, which can be found on page 98 of tonight's agenda, is a retrospective application for the replacement of a fence with pedestrian gates at Hartley House, Bottle Lane, Hartley Westbourne. The application is recommended for refusal, and that enforcement action is taken to remove the boundary fence and gates for the reasons outlined on tonight's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have any council representatives. We don't have anybody lined up to speak against, but I do have Mrs. Fisher in support if you'd like to approach. Welcome to Development Control. You're seated if you press the button on your right, and when you're ready you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. To give you a picture, the property boundary along Bottle Lane is roughly half fence and half the original 3.3 metre wall, which was the original Georgian wall. I'd like to take you to mid-February 2022, when Storm Eunice arrived. 40 metres of the wall fell flat onto the road. A 200-year-old copper beech fell into the road, smashing through the fence. Glass from a huge skylight blew out, piercing a flat roof. We had water pouring into the house. We went out onto the road and hand-picked out the bricks that could be reused, that were not smashed by the impact on the road, and started the process to apply for planning permission for the wall. We did not realise we needed planning for a fence, for which I apologise profusely. What we subsequently did was in good faith and obviously in plain sight, and at massive cost to us. We thought we were doing the right thing. We set about replacing the fence using exactly the same method, materials and design as the original, which had been there since the 1950s. After a lot of research, we found a lovely timber yard in Carner, Wiltshire, called Vaston's, who used English oak, not European, from fallen trees, so it was pure sustainable in every way. And they took on the massive task of making 1,575 to 50mm feathered boards, which are very narrow and very slim. 38 massive supporting solid oak posts. We also followed the exact line of the original fence, which had 6 curved sections. So we had to have all the arras rails, top, baseboards, and the chamfered capping pieces all hand carved out of the same English oak. After months of looking into and talking to people, we found the finest craftsmen, and they set about making the fence. They found they couldn't even use a hammer gun as the oak was so hard. Each nail had to be hand hammered. It took the guys 3 months, 2 guys, 3 months to erect this fence and the integral pedestrian gates. It is a structure to last another few generations, we hoped. We felt it was English craftsmanship at its best. After 65 years, the original fence had lost its baseboard, was sagging badly, and had been propped up with very ugly concrete posting. The height of this was 1.7 in this state, even bowed. We decided to marginally increase the height of the fence by 17%, which is 30 centimetres, to 2 metres, purely to prevent crime. There is a big plastic oil tank, which is not only ugly but very visible from driving down the road, that is positioned on just the other side of the fence, and we had many issues of oil being stolen during the night.
You've got 1 minute left.
This has not happened since. Am I 1 minute?
Yeah.
Yes. This has not happened since the fence has been increased in height, and I'm guessing it's harder to access. So to conclude, we feel strongly that the new fence is not a new form of boundary treatment, as was originally asserted by the Basingstoke and Dean, but an identical replacement that had been erected prior to the listing of the building in 1957. The only difference is this slight increase in height. We strongly feel that the slight increase in height of the fence has no impact on the ability to experience or the impact on the Grade 2 listed house. The fence remains considerably lower, 1 metre or more, than the planting set immediately behind it. So the impact on the house is non-existent. The planting is kept at the same height as the wall up the lane to keep the proportions correct. It also largely blocks the views from the house from Bottle Lane, in fact totally blocks the views from the house to Bottle Lane. The only area that you can see the house is through the entrance gates.
If you could sum up, please.
We have unanimous support from the Parish Council.
Okay, do we have any questions, councillors, for Mrs Fisher? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Oh, if you could switch the mic off on the right. Great, thank you very much. Okay, do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Falk?
Yeah, could you just clarify point B? It sort of reads that you may or you may not take enforcement. So could you clarify whether you would or you wouldn't?
Thank you, Councillor. So that is the recommendation that enforcement action is taken by the planning officer. The enforcement department would need a separate expediency assessment to balance the proposal. So it may be the case that there's a recommendation for refusal, but for the reasons outlined in a report by officers, they may consider it not to be expedient from an enforcement perspective. But if the councillors are minded to agree with the decision, then the expediency test would be sort of carried out on behalf of the enforcement officer. So it's unlikely, but there would be a second process that would need to be sort of agreed by officers in the enforcement department as well.
Okay, Councillor Miller.
Page 105 of the report under the paragraph conclusion. I'm having a bit of a problem in the middle part of it. It's acknowledged a similar type of fence was formerly in use as a front boundary of the listed building prior to the storm damage. It is considered that the previous fence, which it would appear predated the listing of the building, was of an inappropriate design. I believe that fence was put in the 1950s. And now, retrospectively, somebody's come to the conclusion that it was of inappropriate design in the 1950s. That's nonsense. It must have been appropriate for 60 years plus. That is not an argument to my mind, in the conclusion. It makes nonsense of that conclusion paragraph. If it was there before and had been accepted, why are we objecting to it now, retrospectively, when it was blown down? I really don't see the logic.
Well,
can you explain to me what's going on here?
Hopefully we'll have an answer for you.
I was going to say, Councillor, I mean, obviously, committee comes to their own view on that point. I think the fact is just simply being recorded that there was a fence there previously, and that is, you know, part of the overall assessment. You can come to a different view on that, but ultimately what you see in the report is up to you to decide as to how you balance those issues out and assess it yourselves.
Any more questions for officers? Okay, we'll move on to debate. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. First thing I want to bring to everybody's attention is camera angles. Looking at those pictures there, picture on the left, I'm looking down at the fence and level with the vegetation. Picture on the right, showing the new fence, I'm looking up at the fence and up at the vegetation. That picture is obviously taken from a much, much lower perspective. And if we can change the slide to the one that shows the outbuildings, the same situation is there. We're looking down on the left and we're looking up on the right. So the impact on the view is nowhere near as big as it is shown on those pictures. The fence is very new. It's light. It's very, very stark. It will blend in. It is only 12 inches higher than the old fence. And the reason for refusal is impact on the street scene and spoiling the view of the house. Well, you couldn't see the house anyway. If we can change the picture again, the one showing the white gates would be helpful. Yeah, that one. You couldn't see the house with the old fence there because the hedge is considerably higher than the fence anyway. And I really, really do think, is anybody ever going to drive down Bottle Lane there and go, oh my God, my view is ruined? And the answer to that is no, they're not. It is a very, very well-made fence of traditional oak. It's exactly the right fence. It's unfortunate that the applicant didn't realise that he needed to put in a planning application. We know the rules, a lot of the public don't. So I totally disagree with the officer's recommendation and I move for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chair. I fully concur with Councillor Robinson's statements. I also would say that it's been a very well considered and constructed fence and taken into account its setting and its purpose. I would happily second Councillor Robinson's motion.
Councillor Hussey? Okay, now. Okay, right. Councillor Bound?
Yeah, just quickly, I would disagree with the statements, to be honest with you. I think the fence is totally out of keeping. That's a personal point of view. The old fence looked much more in keeping with the setting and the setting of, was it Bottle Lane? However, I don't feel that I'm in a position to be backing the recommendation if there's any thought that this fence is going to come down, because I do appreciate what the applicant has actually tried to do, and they didn't know that they didn't know that they were actually breaking the law, if you like. So I can't vote for against the proposal, but I don't think the new one is appropriate.
Okay, we have a live proposal to approve. Yeah, I've been advised we should take the recommendations A and B first. Okay, recommendation A, move for approval, duly seconded. Those in favour, please show. 1, 2, 3. So we don't need to, do we need to vote on B? No, okay, we don't need to be voting on B, I'm advised. Okay. Abstentions? 1. 2. None against. Okay, can we have the decision, please? Oh, reasons and conditions.
We'll just recommend some suggested conditions, but as I understand from the debate, the impact on the listed building and the reasons for refusal put forward are not agreed with in terms of the impact on visibility displays, etc. So that would form the reason for approval. Apologies, and I believe we have some suggested conditions, which are just in terms of, admittedly it's retrospective, but the fence being maintained in accordance with the approved plans and materials as stated in the application.
Okay, right. That point has already been captured. Okay, so Mike's got a point on that.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we do obviously try and make things as representative as possible. I think the reason we brought in the additional point, which is credited to Street View, is because at the viewing panel, members requested an additional point. Now, clearly we can't go back in time and photograph what was there. It was simply trying to do that, so hence why we end up with two different things. Absolutely agree, it is taken from different angles, which is a point raised by Councillor Robinson.
Okay, so if we could have the decision, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the application has been approved for the reverse reasons for refusal, so that the proposal development would not have a harmful impact upon the street scene, and nor would it have an impact on the listed building. And there are two recommended conditions, one with regards to plans and one with regards to materials. So that application has been approved subject to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, moving on to item number 5, Gailey Brook House, Kingsclere. If I could have the officer introduced, please.
Thank you, Chair. Item 5 seeks planning permission for the erection of a 2-storey side extension at Gailey Brook House, Kingsclere. The dwelling was originally granted planning permission in 2009 and was subject to a legal agreement to restrict its occupation to an agricultural worker. Additionally, of note is that the dwelling has already been previously extended. By way of update, there is a summary of the committee site visit in the update paper. And at that site visit, it was observed that the first floor side extension granted in September of last year has now been constructed. As a result of that, all references to the extant permission in the main report should be read as the previous extension. In line with that, is also recommended that the recommendation wording is tweaked slightly just to refer to the previous extension rather than the extant permission. Amended plans were requested from the agent to reflect this situation, but they have not been made available in time for this meeting. The application is before the committee tonight with a recommendation for refusal, and it's been called in by Councillor Rattigan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have anyone down to speak in objection, but we have in support Mr. Van Hinsberg. Welcome to Development Control. If you take a seat to the right and press the right hand button when you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and councillors. As you've just stated, I'm the applicant for this new development on my house. But first of all, I must apologise. This is my first time ever public speaking, so I'll apologise that I may not get the protocol correct. But how do I start? I think basically what I'll have to do is give you a history on how we came about being in the situation we are now. This history, there's probably everybody here could agree with me that if I asked you as children to draw a house, you would draw a square block, 4 windows, a door in the middle, a roof, and perhaps a chimney. That also was what I used to draw. But that also was my dream. One day I would own a house that I built myself. Didn't draw it, built it. Now, through various times, through working hard and getting married to the right person who also had the dream, we would build a house. And it would be built to our recommendation, to our design. We're married now in excess of 60 odd years. Over that 60 years, worked really hard, had children. Because you have children, you have to slightly change your dreams. But the dream of owning and building a house was there all the time. Through the hard times, through times of having to pay 6% mortgage, everybody now says, 6%, what's that? I paid 15% at one time in the 70s. But we carried on with the dream. Now, after a while, we eventually managed to purchase this land. Very naive with respect to that. It was, oh, we can now build a house. On the site was a horrendous corrugated iron barn, which was a total eyesore. An old log cabin, again, a total eyesore. If I told you that we removed 2 large 40 cubic capacity roll-on, roll-off skips with rubbish, just rubbish that we removed from the site. Anyway, we then started the builders in, because I had a very good friend who was a builder, started to build a house. But the wife and I physically cut over 2,000 bricks in half. And also another 2,000 bricks in quarters, because of the very bond of the brickwork required so many half bricks, so many quarter bricks.
1 minute left.
That was done in depths of winter with a freezing cold water cut machine, etc. So we put in a lot of heartache, a lot of hard work to get this building done. Now, I have a concept that anything you design should look good. It should look good within its surroundings. It should be balanced, it should be symmetrical. The very design of this house should be symmetrical. So, perhaps rightly or wrongly, we decided to have an extension on the east side of the house. And we applied for planning permission, we got it, it has since been built, but it's only been just recently constructed. Took one look at it from my entrance drive, which if you, as the committee came, they looked, you open the gates, and your eye is carried to the house. It has to look correct. It has to be aesthetically beautiful.
If you could sum up.
Now we've got the extension on the eastern side. It doesn't look correct. We need it to look correct on the western side of the house. Now I'm not doing this for financial gain. I'm doing it for my grandchildren.
Okay, I'm afraid you're out of
people
time.
that may use this house in the future.
Okay.
This is also to the benefit of you people.
I'm afraid you're out of time. Do we
About
have
4
any...
minutes.
Yes,
Sorry.
I'm afraid it is, yes. Do we have any questions for Mr Van Hinsberg from councillors? Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr Van Hinsberg. If you could just switch your mic off, that'd be great.
Left hand one.
Right, yeah, right hand one. Oh.
Oh, right hand.
Do we have any questions for officers? Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, can we have some guidance on this agricultural tie? Because it's quite clearly from the site visit a complete anachronism.
Sorry, I might have misunderstood. Are you seeking clarification of what the legal agreement is securing?
Yeah, I was just looking at how do we as a committee, do we take this agricultural tie into account, even though it's years and years ago?
Thank you. So the legal agreement runs with the land and is tied to that planning permission for the original dwelling. So as it stands, that house is legally required to be occupied by an agricultural worker. Whether or not, based on your site visit, you think that that's the current situation, the matter of fact is that the dwelling is tied, and that is how it should be occupied. If there is any, if it's being occupied otherwise, then it is potentially in breach of that legal agreement. So I would say that that is the current situation, and that is the context in which the application should be considered.
Okay, any more questions for officers from councillors? Okay, I think it's shaking heads there. Okay, then we'll move on to debate. Councillor Rattigan.
I'd like to thank the committee for attending the site viewing. It was called to committee on the basis of subjectivity, scale and the location and the cumulative effect of the extension. Now we saw that as you're looking at the right hand extension had been done, and all the applicant is trying to achieve is a balance in his house. Now, in my view, the agricultural tie to this is essentially saying if the applicant stops working on the land, he's got to move from his house. Well, I actually don't believe that that is the case in this. And we walked onto the back, and you can see it is well set. It's set back from the road. There is no landscape harm in this. There is no justification. Had this been a householder's application without the ag tie on it, I'm pretty sure this committee would have approved it. And what we're saying is, it's not a frontage cottage for somebody working on the Carnarvon estate or whatever. This is somebody who's done it for himself and wants to balance his house. And I think it's completely acceptable that this should be approved and does something for his house. He wants it. He wants to continue to live there. And why shouldn't he have a house that he has, he says, worked hard for? I have to say, in my view, we should recommend this for approval, and I'm happy to move it for approval.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. When I see the words agriculturally tied dwelling, I get this sort of image of something a farm worker would live in. 2, 3 bedroom, mid-terrace or end terrace, not this. If this has ever been an agricultural worker's dwelling, I'll get a job in my retirement as a cowhand, because I wouldn't mind moving into one like it. So this business over it being an agricultural tied dwelling as part of the reason for refusal is just an absolute nonsense. So I'm going to completely and utterly ignore that. I look at it as a building in the countryside. How does it look now? It's a very big building. It's set in large grounds. How will it look if this goes ahead? It'll still be a very big building in large grounds. So there is really very, very little difference in architectural terms, in countryside terms, and actually I agree with the applicant. It would look better balanced up. I'm more than happy to second Councillor Rattigan's motion.
Okay, anyone else wish to speak? Go, Mike, yes, come in.
So, Chair, thank you. Just appreciate members are going to vote on this, but it's just on the point about the agricultural tie. I understand everything that members have said, but you do need to be mindful of it. You can't ignore the agricultural tie. It is factually there. So it is an agriculturally tied dwelling through the Section 106 agreement, which continues to be maintained. That may be that the committee come to a view that, given other developments on the site, that this development wouldn't make the situation any worse. That might be entirely appropriate for you to come to that decision if that's how you decide to balance the issues. But just for the purposes of the decision, you couldn't ignore it, because I think that would make it an unlawful decision insofar as what it was there for. Bearing in mind the history of the site is set out quite extensively in the report in terms of page 111, 112, 113. It is an agriculturally tied dwelling.
Councillor Rattigan, Councillor Robinson.
Chair, thank you for that. I think the applicant accepts that there will be an ag tie on it in perpetuity until either him or his descendants take it off, and that will be their responsibility to do so. Is that not right? I see a shake from the legal.
They can't take it off. It's for us to decide whether or not it goes off. They'd have to put an application in. Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification. Obviously, they will apply at appropriate time.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. In the light of what Mike said, I would change my statement slightly, if that's okay, to I consider that the relevance of the agricultural tie has been lost in the planning history of the building, if that helps. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the table that's been duly seconded. No other councillors wishing to speak. We'll move to vote. Those in favour, please show. Okay. Those against? And I haven't voted. Okay, well, can we have the decision, please? With conditions.
Thank you. So that application has been approved on the basis that it would be an acceptable form of development and not give rise to adverse impacts on landscape character. It's suggested that the following conditions be applied. Firstly, a condition requiring that the development be carried out in accordance with the submitted plans, the standard 3-year condition in relation to implementation, and that materials be used shall match the existing building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, item 6, 2 Winchester Street, Basingstoke. If we could have the officer presenting introduce the item, please.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 6, which can be found on page 123 of tonight's agenda, is a full application for the change of use of land for the area to the rear of the property for the seating and dining for the new restaurants and bar, including the erection of a raised terrace and screen to the perimeter of the external area to the rear of 2 Winchester Street, Basingstoke. The application is recommended for approval for the reasons outlined on tonight's agenda paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have anyone down objecting. Mr. Runcie in support? Welcome to Development Control. When you're ready, you have 4 minutes.
2 Winchester Street has recently been converted from the former Lloyds Bank building into a new restaurant. This application seeks consent to change the use of the yard to the rear of the building to allow the erection of a raised terrace with screening. The site lies within the town centre area in close proximity to a number of late night businesses. Unlike the majority of those businesses, the restaurant is restricted to an over 25 policy after 10 p.m. The new restaurant has been well received since opening a few weeks ago with no reported antisocial issues. The site lies within the local conservation area, and whereas the former bank building is an impressive and important building of local interest, the Heritage Officer concedes the yard to the rear does not make a positive contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area. The proposed terrace and screen will have a positive impact on the character of the area. The terrace will allow for outdoor dining for 24 covers only and will be restricted to use until 10 p.m. There will be no music played after 8 p.m. The neighbours in the block of flats near the application site have raised concerns over noise and privacy. The south facade facing the application site does not appear to include any habitable windows. The screen to the perimeter of the terrace will provide privacy to those using the terrace and to any local residents. The case officer has assessed this on site and satisfied that there will be no adverse impact. Regarding noise, as stated, the applicant has agreed to restrict the use of the terrace to 10 p.m. With the music to 8 p.m. The Environmental Health Officer has been consulted as part of the application and states that the premises licence has been granted, which restricts opening hours and includes conditions to minimise noise. As stated, the terrace is for dining only. I believe there will be no harm caused as a result of the development, and in terms of noise, are overlooking and therefore ask that you approve and agree with the case officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Chair. Can you tell us where the nearest residential neighbours are as opposed to commercial neighbours?
Can you switch the mic on?
The red line is the proposed terrace. The nearest residential that we're aware of anyway, obviously there's been quite a lot converted as part of the Park Q and approvals, but it's about 15 metres to the north. It's the former opticians building.
Do you know if we've got plot numbers on the plan? Can you relate that to a plot number, sort of 9, 11, 13, or going the other way, 12, 13, 14, 16?
It's roughly where the cursor is, slightly higher than that. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions, anybody? Thank you very much. Questions for officers? Councillor Miller, Councillor Rattigan.
How many years was the Lloyds Bank closed for? Because I think it has a relevance to the economic benefits in this.
Thank you, Councillor. As part of this report, I'm not sure. It may have been included in the previous report, but I think it was for a reasonable amount of time it was closed, yeah.
Any more questions for officers? Okay, and we'll move on to debate. Councillor Miller.
I really had only one question when going through the report, and it's been answered by condition 6 because of the restricted hours. I think that's a very sensible timing for a commercial restaurant, especially given the location. It's minimal impact to any kind of views being at the back of the property, and I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
And Ken, you wish to second?
Happy to second that.
Okay. Councillor Durrant, did you have your hand up? No. Councillor Hussey? Okay, we have it moved and seconded. We shall move to vote. Those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Okay, if we could have a record of the decision, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the application is approved for the reasons outlined on tonight's agenda paper and subject to the conditions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, which brings us on to item 7, Flint Cottage Free Folk Priors. If we could have the officer presenting introduced, please.
Item 7 seeks planning permission for the erection of a replacement agricultural field shelter. The application site comprises of an agricultural field to the west of Priory Lane in Freefolk. The site is used for the grazing of sheep, and the proposed field shelter would provide vehicle and tool storage open bays for sheep and lambing, and an overnight sleep shelter. The existing field shelter is to be removed. Whilst there's no update in the update paper, there is a verbal update, and that's just in relation to condition 6 of the main agenda. Officers recommend a slight amendment to the wording, just to clarify that the animals are not housed within the building beyond the extent that's shown on the plan submitted. The application is before the Development Control Committee tonight due to the number of objections received and the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So, have we got Mrs. Ogden to speak against? She's not here. Okay. Do we have Mr. Kitchen to speak in support? Welcome to Development Control. When you're seated ready, press the right hand button. You've got 4 minutes.
Thank you. I hope I don't need all 4 minutes. We've lived here for 24 years. When we moved in, we had an 8-acre pony paddock out the back, which had very minimal environmental worth. So I've spent much of the last 24 years trying to improve the environmental worth of the land, and have done so by breaking the land up into 3 different portions, planting about 2,500 native trees, an orchard, putting in bees, and planting a meadow, and using sheep to help keep the grass down. We're looking at swapping our flock from Jacob sheep, which are large and have a temperament a bit like Donald Trump's, towards Wesson, which are the world's smallest breed of sheep, and are very light grazers, so they'd be good for the soil, and they don't attack trees either. So that's a big plus. But they do need to have a sheltered area, especially for lambing. So we'd be looking to have a flock of around 30. But we would need to have an appropriate place to keep them during lambing, plus tractor and all the other paraphernalia that goes with looking after trees and looking after meadows. So we have taken into account objections from our neighbours and have moved the site to where they had asked us to do so, and we're happy to comply with anything else that you would want us to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Kitching? Councillor Robinson?
Thank you. Just punching some numbers into my calculator now. Your existing field shelter is 10.2 square metres, and the one you're proposing is 92 square metres. That's a huge increase. How do you justify that increase?
I need somewhere to put the tractor, like I say, the paraphernalia for looking after a field as well, so you need toppers. Trees are getting very stressed in summer now, so you need to have an ability to water them, so having a water tanker as well. And also I have a small trailer for liming to keep the pH in the field correct. And all these things are currently just dotted around the field under tarpaulins. Plus, we're moving from 12 sheep to 30, so it needs more space.
You're going to 30 sheep. Do you have other land other than this site as well?
No, Westlands are a small breed. They're the world's smallest breed, and they're tree friendly as well, so they can, unlike the Jacobs at the moment, I can put them in between the trees.
Any more questions, anybody? Okay, thank you very much for your contribution. Councillors, do you have any questions for officers? No? Okay, we'll move on to debate. Anyone wish to kick things off? Councillor Miller?
I'll start again. We're back to an improvement over biodiversity for a start. Biodiversity covers a whole lot of things. And the applicant has gone the extra mile with his neighbours. He's actually listened to his neighbours and relocated or adjusted the location of the proposed barn development, I think I'll describe it as, to satisfy them. And I think anybody that does that is taking care of his environment, his neighbours, and I move for the officer's recommendation for approval. I've got no other comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I've asked a few questions and the answers I've got I'm really happy with, so I'm happy to second it.
Councillor Durrant? Yeah, okay. Right, we have a proposal moved and seconded for the recommendation. Those in favour, please show. Okay, that's unanimous. Right, if we could have the decision, please.
Thank you, Chair. The application is approved for the reasons set out on page 138 of the agenda and in accordance with the conditions, subject to the slight amendment of the wording of condition 6 as reported in the update. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Which brings us on to item 8, land south of South Western Railways at Crown Lane, Newnham. If we could have the officer introduced, please.
Thank you, Chair. So item number 8, which can be found on page 153 of tonight's agenda, is a full application for a proposed trackside Wi-Fi installation of a 6-metre pole and ancillary works at land south of Western Rail tracks in Crown Lane, Newnham. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and for the reasons outlined on tonight's agenda paper. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have anyone down to speak on this item. Councillors, do you have any questions you would like to ask of officers? Okay, there doesn't appear to be any. Debate? Councillor Godson.
Thank you, Chair. The Newnham Parish Council have no concerns about this application, and in the light of that, I'm very happy to propose that we approve the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Miller. Okay, we have a motion on the table, moved and seconded. Those in favour, please show. Unanimous. Can we have the decision, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the application has been approved, subject to the conditions listed at the end of the report on tonight's agenda paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brings us on to the last item, number 9, 25 Heath End Road, Borkhurst. If we could have the officer introduction, please.
Thank you. Item 9 seeks planning permission for the erection of a new mixed-use building and associated parking. The proposed 2-storey building would provide a 1-bedroom residential unit and a commercial unit at ground floor. The application does not specify the commercial use intended, and as such the application has been treated as an undetermined sui generis use. By way of update, at the time of writing the report, comments had not been received from the West Berkshire emergency planners. However, it is now advised that these comments have been received and they've confirmed that they support Hampshire County Council's response to advise against the application. It is also noted that comments received from the Office for Nuclear Regulation were omitted from the main agenda. It's confirmed that they advise against the development on the basis that they have not received the assurances that the development can be accommodated within West Berkshire's off-site emergency planning arrangements, and that's set out for you in the update paper in more detail. In addition, it is recommended that an additional informative is added to the recommendation, which sets out that the application may be still liable in the event that the applicant submit an appeal should the application be refused this evening. The application is before the committee at the request of Councillor Rattigan, and the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have no parish council, we have no one objecting, but we have Mr. Cottrell in support, if you'd like to approach. And when you're ready, you'll have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair. As you've just heard, 2 reasons for refusal. Jumping straight into number 2. The first, the latest officer has requested the information in the type of business just over 2 weeks ago, which was provided but has not been considered. The applicant has a beautician that has been lined up to take the unit should it be approved tonight. What I don't understand is why it's taken since the 23rd of September 2021, when the application was actually submitted, and 3 officers later to ask us for this information and still not include it. Turning to the main reason, AWE again. The proposal is for a 1-bedroom apartment and a small commercial unit, and the emergency planners have advised against this due to the emergency plan and the distance from the site. The site is just over 600 metres from the fence line. I have sat here before and I've said to you all that the AWE at this end of the AWE site is the helipad, car parking, the rec sock, which is the football fields, the tennis courts, etc., which is all open to general members of public before you hit the main fence line of AWE. That measures actually 1.2 kilometres from the site, which is twice the stated distance. The officer has also stated that the site falls within Sector J of the DEPZ, which is incorrect. It falls within Sector L. The most recent report I could find from AWE was for a site that was just up Heath End Road for a 4-bedroom house, which AWE did not object against. In the report, it shows that Sector J is as having 977 homes and 2,345 residents, whereas Sector L has 796 homes and 1,911 residents, which is very different. Within the last few weeks, I've had an application for a 3-bedroom bungalow approved on under delegated powers on Southdown Road in Tadley, which is 785 metres from the fence line. And the emergency planners again said no objection due to the distance from the site, which in my eyes shows that there is an inconsistency in their approach. The other thing that actually strikes me as very odd is that Tadley is not covered by an Article 4 direction, meaning my good old friend permitted development. You can take a 3-bedroom, semi-detached home in Tadley and convert it into a 6-bedroom HMO with no consultation with the emergency planners. An already established business within Tadley also does not have any restrictions on the number of people it can employ. So how are these people accounted for within the emergency plan? I can name a number of sites which are all within 1 kilometre of AWE, which have all been approved either under the delegated powers with the officers or by yourselves as a committee. One such application was approved a few years back, which again was one of mine on the corner of Pinks Lane, which for those that don't know is located along Heath End Road, about half the distance from the application site to AWE. Given the size of this proposal, a 1-bedroom apartment, so at best it could have 2 people living in it, I really cannot see how the level of harm is such to warrant a refusal, and I therefore ask you to please approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, Mr. Cottrell? Anybody? Okay, thank you for your contribution. Councillors, do you have any questions for officers? Councillor Rattigan.
Can you confirm which sector this house would be in?
We are just trying to clarify that now on the relevant maps. The report does state Sector J, but we're just clarifying if that is in fact correct, given what we've just heard.
Any other questions? Councillor Miller?
Bearing in mind the objections coming from AWE Northwest Berkshire, the officers here put a refusal on this. I'd be very reluctant to do anything else but refuse it, bearing in mind the comments coming from the authorities. I'm not sure what position we're in as an LPA if we overturn what they recommend.
It's advisory. It's advisory.
Ted Miller. So I think in terms of the planning policy context, it's planning policy SS7 of your local plan. that effectively says that it's looking at the scale and location of the development, etc. The one, so I would agree with the comment that you've just made, and that's in accordance with what we said in the report. The one point I would raise is that obviously the applicant has suggested that it's in a different sector. If it's not possible to adjudicate on that this evening, then I think the committee would be best placed to defer the application if that issue needs to be resolved, because if that is material, that is what the consultation response, I believe, from the ONR considered in one particular sector, but we would need to, I think, have clarity on that prior to a decision being made.
Councillor Bound.
Yes, I was just going to ask, would the emergency planners have looked at the position of the house, or would they just have taken the officer report that it was in Sector J?
So in terms of the consultation, they look at it themselves, so they don't take our view and then we consider their consultation response, so it's the other way around. But I think on the basis of what's been said by Mr Cottrell, I think it is worth reviewing that point, and in particular, even if it is in the alternative sector, I think there still needs to be the discussion with the same consultees as to whether that would alter their opinion or not.
Councillor Miller.
On the basis of the conversation with the officers and the questions we've asked, Chair, could I move for deferment until those questions have been answered from the appropriate authorities?
Yeah, you can move for a deferment. Yeah. Councillor Robinson.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion for deferment. Those in favour, please show. Okay, that's carried. No against. I didn't vote. Right, item is deferred. Can we have that, please?
Thank you, Chair. That application is deferred for clarification on which sector the application site falls in, along with consultation with the emergency planners on that point. Thank you.
Okay, there being no more items tonight, I declare this meeting closed. Thanks everyone for your attendance.
Thank you, Chair.